May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. They thought they had it all figured out. He cannot win, they thought. We've got him this time, they thought. We are in control. For these past 3 Sundays, we have eavesdropped as Jesus has debated the religious leaders of his day and the temple hierarchy. And in argument after argument, Jesus leaves them speechless, not knowing what to say. So they send a group with both liberals and conservatives, and the delegation sounds all pious and respectful. The delegation asks a simple-sounding question: is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? The question, of course, is designed as a trap. Jesus says, no, it is not lawful. Then he is preaching insurrection, and they can turn him over to the Romans, who will put him to death. On the other hand, if Jesus says, yes, it is lawful, then pious Jews would regard Jesus as preaching blasphemy. And the religious leaders can denounce him to the crowds and discredit him. Jesus, of course, does the questioners one better. Again, he turns the tables on them, and Jesus says, show me the coin used for the tax. Once again, that sounds simple enough. That the hated Roman tax had to be paid with hated Roman coins, because usually a hated Roman denarius. Hated because it carried the image of Caesar, and the inscription on the coin reads, Caesar Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. Because they considered the image of the emperor to be idolatrous and the inscription to be idolatrous, devout Jews did not want to touch the denarius, did not want to carry the denarius, and in some cases didn't even want to look at a denarius. Yet these seemingly pious questioners produced the hated idolatrous denarius readily enough. And Jesus' question makes them handle it. Jesus' question makes them look at it. And then Jesus says to them, whose likeness is this and whose inscription? And they say, Caesar's. So Jesus shuts down the questioning delegation by telling them, give back, therefore, the things of Caesar to Caesar, and the things of God to God. Jesus revealed the dilemma the debaters tried to use to trap him as a false choice. Their vision was too narrow. They thought the world could be divided into 2 distinct realms, God's realm and man's realm, or God's domain and Caesar's domain. And Jesus showed them that this is an inherently false point of view. Jesus knew that the Caesars of every generation regard themselves as the only authority, the only one in charge. Fine, Jesus says, give back to them what they think they already have. But give back, Jesus says, the things of God to God. And that's where the teaching really begins. Because if we are to make any sense of Jesus' answer, we have to ask ourselves, well, what belongs to Caesar? And what belongs to God? Most of us are like the Pharisees and the Herodians and the religious leaders who don't understand Jesus. Most of us think that reality can be divided into 2 distinct worlds. There's God's world over here, and then over here in a distinct realm is the real world. In terms of today's gospel, God's world and Caesar's world. In Caesar's world, bills have to get paid, and you have to find a job. You have to swallow hard and make hard choices that you don't like. And Caesar's world says that there is never enough. So grab everything you can as fast as you can, and that'll take the hindmost. Caesar's world says that everyone can be sorted out into the hard, tough guys, the realists, the winners, and then everybody else, the losers, the suckers. God's world can have an hour or so on Sunday mornings, but we have to render unto Caesar the rest of the week. The stuff we talk about on Sunday mornings can stay on Sunday mornings. Fortunately, God is not limited by our limited vision. God is not constrained by our distorted view of reality. Because even if our perception is narrow and fragmented, God's reality is broad and knows no limits. God's kingdom has no limits. God's kingdom is everything. God's kingdom is everything. There is no two kingdoms here and there. There is just God's kingdom. And it incorporates Caesar's entire kingdom. In fact, Caesar's kingdom is just a small part of God's kingdom. Once we understand that reality, once we see the world that way, it changes everything. The stuff we talk about on Sunday morning applies all week long, all our lives long. The values that Jesus talks about apply to everyone, always, at all times. In God's kingdom, there is always enough for everyone. We just have to figure out the best way to share everyone's gifts. In God's kingdom, there is no distinction between losers and suckers and the hard, tough guys, because we are all beloved of God, and God sees every one of us as sisters and brothers. Everyone. Everyone is the beloved child. There are no insiders and outsiders, because every one of us is made in the image and likeness of God. Because every one of us is made in the image and likeness of God, every one of us belongs to God. And when we give back to God that which is God, we give God everything. And we acknowledge that God is in charge of everything. We acknowledge that God owns everything. And we acknowledge that God deserves everything. So when we understand Jesus' message this way, it changes the way we look at Caesar. Caesar is not in charge of his own dominion. Every Caesar, every king, every emperor, every ruler, every politician of every party truly exists only to serve God, to be God's agent, to serve God's will, to help bring about God's kingdom, and to help share the love of God. So it is with us. Give back, therefore, to the emperor the things that are the emperor. Give back to God the things that are God applies to us, too. But we know that the whole world, everything, all parts of our lives, all of us belongs to God, and that we owe everything to God. We give to the emperor, to the state, to our political system as God's agents, as God's instruments. But God is in control. The world, God's world, cannot be divided. God's love cannot be limited, because it all belongs to God, and we all belong to God, and we are all beloved of God. Amen.